My name is Ash and I'll be the Zoom moderator today. Please join me in welcoming Michael Latsko to Learning Man at ASU. Michael serves as Senior Director, HR Strategic Initiatives at University of Virginia. Michael has led the HR Transformation Initiative at UVA, deploying Workday to approximately 10,000 faculty, staff, and student employees. So I'm going to hand it over to our speaker now.
Great, thank you so much, and hello everyone. I'm coming to you from Charlottesville, Virginia, where it's a balmy 98 degrees and about 150% humidity. So I hope that wherever you are, you're enjoying better weather than I am. So we've got some general announcements to make. Please remain on mute for the presentation and type in your questions in the chat box. We're gonna try to get to the questions at the end of the presentation. And if we obviously don't get to all of them, we'll try to follow up after the session as well. So the topic today is how the University of Virginia used cloud technology to transform HR, to drive agility and insights. And I've sort of structured the presentation to think about sort of our past, sort of how we got to where we are, our current situation with the COVID-19 crisis, and then what we're doing about the future as we begin to welcome students back to classes resuming next month. Just a quick little bit about me. I've been at the university as an employee for about 8 years. I am a graduate, what we call a double Wahoo or double Who. So I have a degree from our college in English and then a degree from our law school. I came into HR accidentally. I began practicing law and then came to the private sector and ended up, after a series of other jobs in an HR capacity, and have been an HR professional for a little over 20 years now. So here's what we're going to talk about on our session today. Just a little bit about UVA, just so you have some context. Why we made a change adopting the Workday technology, sort of what the situation was that brought us to where we are today. What we actually delivered in our implementation, because it was quite a strenuous journey to get where we were and are. And then, of course, sort of what happened in 2020 as we had to pivot about 14 months into our implementation, or what happened with the COVID-19 crisis. And then what's happening next as we welcome students back to grounds. So here's a little bit about UVA, if you're not familiar with us. We're in Charlottesville, Virginia, which is almost smack dab in the middle of Virginia. Founded in 1819 by Thomas Jefferson. A picture of our, our grounds. We call the campus at Charlottesville grounds. It's a long-standing tradition, so I don't refer to it as campus. So 1819 founded, 22,000 employees, 9,000 contingent workers for anybody who uses Workday and knows what that means. But they are largely, we have a lot of student workers that are in the system and unpaid workers, so people who need to have provisioning and computer access and systems access, but who are perhaps unpaid volunteers at the hospital or what have you. Among public universities, we are generally top ranked in any number of categories. We have a level 1 trauma hospital center and an academic medical center, which has consistently been rated the number one hospital in Virginia for the last several years. As recently as last year, we launched our 13th school that makes up the university, and it was a school of data science. So that's come online now. We had a brand new leadership team coming in 2018, so a new president who brought in a new provost, a new chief operating officer, and then we hired very recently, late last year, a new head of our health affairs. So somebody who oversees all of our School of Medicine, School of Nursing, and the hospital. So completely new leadership team that was not in place when we made the decision to transform the HR operation or to implement Workday. So we did our big bang approach to an implementation of the Workday Human Capital Management and Payroll modules. That launched in January of 2019. And we have now in the works the Workday Finance going live in 2022. So we will now, with our system of record, have Workday HCM Payroll and Finance all in one place. So this is the context that brought us to where we are today. So we had our academic division, which now is 13 schools. We had the medical center, which is the hospital. Whoops. We have also a clinical practice plan, which is called the University Physicians Group. The academic division and the medical center are state agencies, and as such, operate under the state rules and regulations and more or less a civil service kind of program. Our University Physicians Group, the clinical practice plan, is a 501c3 private foundation, if you will, so it can operate independently and is also therefore not subject to a lot of FOIA or Freedom of Information Act requests, whereas the public entities are. So it was important as we considered a tool that we could accommodate these various and sundry requirements. We had, just as an example, 88 different kinds of retirement calculations, because as the state would provision a new retirement option or plan, there was a lot of grandfathering that was required. And so with all these plans and grandfathers in place, it was just almost impossible to keep track of all these retirement calculations. We had over 300 pay codes. We had 160 integrations with other systems, so not just benefits providers, but all kinds of other systems. We had about 72 legacy systems. Each of those independent entities, the academic division, the medical center, and our physicians group, had their own principal HRIS. The medical center used PeopleSoft, the academic division used Oracle e-Business Suite, and the University Physicians Group, much smaller, used UltiPro. So we had all of these things in place and 163 benefit plans when we looked at across all of the different employee makeup that we had. The environment for HR was incredibly decentralized, but not just decentralized, but fragmented. In other words, schools could have directors of HR. They were responsible for faculty as well as staff in those schools, whereas central HR was responsible only for staff, and the provost had the responsibility for faculty. So many schools had designed their processes in the ways that they wanted it to happen. As just one example, when I went to the School of Medicine and asked them to tell me how they recruited faculty, clinical faculty, they started out by saying, well, which department do you want to talk about? So in addition to 13 schools, we were getting to department level kinds of customization. And of course, with Oracle as an example, we were able to customize that. So it made it all very complex to understand and get up a learning curve if you were becoming an HR professional in one, or as a manager in one of these organizations. And then in terms of policies, we had 284 conflicting business policies. And by that, I mean the payroll that ran on the academic division was biweekly, but on weeks 1 and 3, whereas in the medical center, it was biweekly on weeks 2 and 4. We also had monthly payroll for faculty. So we were running 5 payrolls, running payroll every week, really. We also had different PTO, paid time off, and different holidays in the academic division from the medical center. And so this was the environment, very complex, just in terms of what was happening with an HR structure and organization, and also within the systems of HR. So here's what we sort of promised to the world at UVA when we contemplated this HR transformation. And we said that we can fix it. Everything's going to be easier. This new technology will be intuitive. It will increase efficiency and save money. It will help to establish consistency, right? Eliminate those sort of department by department processes. It'll improve our processes and policies. It'll reduce administrative burden, add strategic value, and align with the goals of each of the departments or schools and their academic missions. And we said we would do this by combining then our HR organization from 3 separate organizations into one organization. We would embed within the schools and units HR business partners, which was a concept that was unknown to these schools and units. But what they thought that meant was people to help them with their transactions. And what we meant in HR is to people, HR professionals, to help them solve their business problems, right? And with the human capital sort of perspective. We created a one-stop HR solution center. In the past, we had 3 different solution centers, one for the hospital, one for the academic division, and one for the physicians group. So now we had one place that people could call or email to be able to get responses to their HR questions and issues. We promised them best-in-class technology, right? We did an exhaustive due diligence on the various technologies that were available. We had vendors come to Charlottesville several times as we down selected and had them handle complex scenarios for us so we could see how they would in fact operate in their systems. We did an extensive training for our HR professionals because again, we were coming from different environments and we were now going to be operating under one common leadership structure and governance structure. So we wanted to make sure that the training was consistent, that people understood what was expected of them and how they should behave and act. We expanded our service catalog. We, for example, had a pretty robust employee relations operation in the hospital, but not so much in the academic division. It was very decentralized, so the schools were handling a lot of their own discipline, except when it came to things like filing grievances, which we had to do in the state, where the central office had to get involved. We also didn't really have a notion of recruitment per se within the academic division. We were a staffing organization, right? We sort of posted and prayed when it came to putting positions up. We were not doing sourcing. We were not doing proactive recruitment. And so that was one of the catalog issues that we were able to expand with this new HR organization. And then we completely redesigned the HR infrastructure, basically 3 large functional groups, one called service, one called talent, and then one called impact and decision support, which was largely the back office of HR. So things like the budget, the systems, the reporting, total rewards, so compensation, benefits, and our wellness program. So that's what we said we were going to do and how we were going to do it. And in fact, here's what we delivered, right? We took these disparate HR groups and created this new UVA HR with having a real talent strategy starting to be developed. People could now see things in the system, right? This notion of transparency. In the old days, if you had posted a job, you had no real idea where that was in the process or who needed to provide an approval or even who had touched a record in the past. And so this new way of providing transparency into where things were and who needed to take steps to approve transactions, as an example. More efficient delivery, right? We really paid attention to the call center statistics and the metrics that we used. We used Salesforce as our CRM in the call center. So now we were able to sort of see how long people waited in queue. We saw the abandonment rate. So we did all these things that were maybe standard for industry in this way, but had not been done in a methodical, sort of intentional way at HR at the university. And of course, we had new technology. We, as an example, we didn't get rid of every old legacy system, but we did get rid of most all of them. The hospital, as an example, kept Kronos because they had adapted that for the very complex scheduling that's required of nurses and operating rooms and other things. So the Kronos continued in the medical center with an integration into Workday. We reduced our staffing from almost 300 people down to about 225, where we are right about now. It was not cheap, right? This was a $50 million project, but we promised and committed to a 15% annual savings on what the prior cost had been so that schools could sort of see value in terms of real dollars. We did complete the reorganization on schedule as we had promised. We actually encountered an implementation situation with all of our retirement plans such that we had to extend our deadline or our launch date by 6 months. So what we did to sort of remain committed to what we had promised, is stood up our new HR organization 6 months before the Workday technology went live. Now, what that meant is that people had to rely on 3 different technologies to find out answers to questions. So it was not an ideal situation. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it if you're thinking about it, but we were able to implement on budget because we had a contingency built in to what we had planned, and we did eat through the contingency to take care of these issues. We did embed the business partners, about 36 of them, around in schools and units and in the hospital. The Solution Center went fully functional, and we launched these communities of expertise and talent and in service and in the impact organization. And we were able to deliver the budget savings to the schools and units. So by any measure of a dashboard, if you will, we delivered on the promise that we made. Now, I'll just tell you, in all transparency and honesty, these are some of the things we heard right after we went live. And we did go live January of 2019 with no break fixes. So in terms of what happened, and we did a payroll the very first week, things in terms of what was expected in a technology implementation went live. But we still heard things like services are no good, the Solution Center never calls us back, our employees, especially faculty, are never going to use this technology, the processes are too hard for managers to use and understand. There were a lot of payroll errors we heard, and everything is being pushed to delegates because we had this notion that, say, a faculty manager wasn't going to really go in and approve time, so they could delegate somebody in their department to do that. And so we heard that there's a lot of work being pushed to delegates, and so that basically there's a shadow HR system in many places such that the cost savings were not tangible and not real. So these are the, after we got live, we were all excited about just getting this thing, the heavy lift done. But when we went out and talked to our constituents and our stakeholders, these are the kind of things we heard, which of course could be very disappointing. And we now actually could go into systems to be able to validate some of these things. And when we did that, this is what we discovered. That in fact, within the first month, we had over 23,000 unique users sign in to Workday, which is about a 95% adoption rate. We had, because we trained everybody to use Salesforce, we were able to look into our case resolution rate, because every time you called in or emailed, right, it created a case, which was then assigned to someone to resolve. We resolved about 98% of them and had over 150,000 documented cases in the first 9 months that we had gone live. In terms of payroll accuracy, we processed about 250,000 paychecks in this first 9 months, and we had 99.7% payroll accuracy. Now, almost unbelievable to me, and I'm not a payroll person, but the old payroll accuracy before we went live was about 94%, right? Which I just can't even understand what that means, that there's that many payroll errors. But even at 99.7, we still got a lot of complaints that you messed up my payroll. And payroll is very important to people. Customer satisfaction, so every time you engaged with the Solution Center, it created an automatic email that would go out and ask you to provide a survey response, very short, just a couple of questions on a 5-point scale. We got about 12,000 of those completed, and the average score was 4.46. In terms of this manager self-service, right, this question about are managers going to do things themselves or are they going to delegate to people? What we found out is that only about 2% of the tasks were in fact delegated. So managers were actually able to do things in the system as we had hoped they would, and that it was intuitive enough for us to do that. And of the cases that we did resolve, within 48 hours, we resolved 80% of the cases. So some things were rather complex, which you would expect, and required more time to resolve. But by and large, considering the number of cases that we got, we were able to resolve most of them within a 2-day term. So sorry for having to take sips of water, but I've got some kind of tickle going on in my throat and apologize for that. So So by all measures, we were sailing through 2019, right? We'd gone live, we were going through stabilization. We adopted internally our own Workday update plan, because Workday, for those of you who know, updates its software 2 times a year, sort of 2 major releases, right? There's no downtime necessarily, except for a few minutes, but they do these product releases and updates twice a year. But we built in a 6-week scrum that where we would go in and look at all these releases and do things that we needed to do or had put off during the implementation. And so we got into this routine where our HR organization and the configuration experts, which we kept within the HR organization, we did not have them over in IT. We had the configurators, as we call them, be within the HR organization, and they would get into this process of continuous innovation and updates. And we published all of that on our website in HR, so that if you were an associate dean in a school and you had logged a ticket for a particular issue and you wanted to know, wonder when they're going to get around to that, you could go onto our website. You could see all of the cases that had been logged for enhancements or kind of desires that people had, and where those things were in the queue. And then as we did as we did these 6-week releases, we would then, of course, do communications and update people. So we got into this sort of rhythm of stabilization was working, things were going great, and we felt pretty good about the progress we had made. A lot of the naysayers had come around, and especially when it came to metrics and data and reporting, because now we could, in the old days, if you asked anybody how many people worked at UVA, you would get as many answers as the number of people you asked. And now for the first time, we were able to see across the entire enterprise, including the clinical practice plan, how many people worked there. We had built this Chinese firewall so that we could protect the FOIA requests from the clinical practice plan. So all of these things had been worked through and had gone well. And then the calendar turned from 2019 to 2020. We were very excited that we had gone, a whole year with what had happened. And then, as all of you know, there was this slight hiccup. It was in early March, that we began in earnest to think about what is going on with the coronavirus and how is that going to impact things here in our part of the world in Central Virginia. And in fact, what HR had done is we had, in addition to this major transformation, hiring a new CHRO, restructuring everything, we physically moved everybody, mainly 200-ish people, except for the business partners and some others, into a new space where we were all physically present together, having been in 9 different locations. And we modeled the very modern office, completely open space, no private offices at all, even for the CHRO. And we had lots of glass conference rooms so that people could get light through, and it was a beautiful space and people were really anxious about it, but when they got there, they found it to be very compelling. But we also made the decision at the time to make everybody be mobile enabled. So everybody got a laptop and dual monitors, and you could just slide your laptop out and take it home if you needed to. And then in early March, we said, we should probably practice remote working. And so what we did is we would rotate different groups to go home, take their computers, and do their work. So for example, the entire Solution Center went away for a week out of the physical building, and you wouldn't have even known it, right? They were able to get all their work done because they had reliable internet and they had a laptop computer, and calls came in and they answered the calls, we forwarded the phones, and things were going great. But then our students went away on spring break, right? That I think it was the second full week of March. And immediately senior leadership was like, I don't think we should bring them back, right? We should not have these students scattered the winds to wherever they went on their spring break, come back into Charlottesville, because that just was not going to be an ideal situation. And so we announced, I think it was maybe the Tuesday of spring break, that, hey, students, don't come back to Charlottesville. because this thing called the coronavirus is at full tilt. The other thing we had to do was think about our employees. And so we said as of March the 13th or 14th, everybody will work remotely who can work remotely. And so people scattered to their homes, they took their computers, and we began this sort of, uphill climb, if you will, to deal with then the effects of the coronavirus. What was very important are some of the decisions that we made at the leadership level, the university leadership level, is they wanted to ensure that people were going to be paid, right? So I came from the private sector, and this was almost unheard of at the time to me, to think that we would continue to pay people even if they could not do their work remotely. But it was very important that the leadership committed to this concept so that people would not have anxiety, and if they were sick, then come into the office. So we made this commitment to have pay continuity. We instituted a hiring freeze. We instituted a salary freeze. And then the other thing, because the Virginia governor declared a state of emergency, a new kind of leave was available for us to use called public health emergency leave. And that applied if you were had some kind of a diagnosis or in some way were not able to work because of your suspected diagnosis or your diagnosis ultimately of COVID-19. And we also created another leave type just called emergency administrative leave for people who were at home, who couldn't work but needed to continue to get paid, who had no diagnosis of COVID-19 or had not been tested or what have you. So all of these things had to happen very quickly. And I will say that our ability to deliver these modifications, if you will, into our systems was made because we had the configuration group within the HR organization. They understood the domain of HR. They had close contact with subject matter experts, and they were able to go in and make these tweaks and these fixes in record time, right? In the old days, you had to get it sort of in queue, and it would depend on when the IT folks would get around to it. Now, I'm not in any way bad-mouthing any IT folks. I'm just saying that was just the way it was, right? Because, and then to do retro, sort of testing of all these things, because so many customizations had been done in the systems prior. So in this new way, with the one code source, right, we were able to make these changes. We could test them quickly, and we could deliver them. And I think people were genuinely very surprised that HR could sort of turn on the dime. And so we had, so these new leave types had to be configured and put into the system. We also made changes to our benefits. We eliminated some waiting periods for short-term disability and other things that had been coded into, configured into the system that needed to be changed. And we were able to take care of a lot of that. The other thing that was really important for us is we were getting a lot of data requests from leaders because they were thinking about things like, well, if we had to furlough people, what does it look like? For example, how many people are right now on emergency administrative leave or public health emergency leave? That might give us some indication of where people aren't able to work, just to be informed about things like that. And so our ability to go into the systems and to pull this information very quickly really made us look good in the eyes of university leadership. We also created a new emergency fund, emergency assistance fund for employees who were impacted financially by various aspects of what was happening in the community, and our ability to sort of how many people are at certain income levels and things like that, right? When I say these things, like it should be able to be gotten out of any system, but in the old days here for us, we would have had to have 3 different systems and having different people pulling them and then doing some kind of accumulation and concatenation of all the data. So having the data all in one place made a big difference. We then had in the medical center, because of what had happened, the volumes, especially first of all, the governor banned elective surgeries. So no more elective surgeries could be done in the hospital. So suddenly you had a huge drop off in volume at the hospital, both in the clinical side, people going to see doctors at clinics, but also in the operating rooms and in the hospital. And because of this fall off, I think it was a figure around $7 million a month that the hospital was going to be losing. And so they quickly needed to understand what are some of the levers that they could pull to engage in what they called financial mitigation. And so the notion of furloughs came into the fold, right? And again, because we're state employees, there were definitely rules about furloughs that we had to follow. And could people be furloughed completely, or could we go on partial furlough, and how do we handle these things? And we were able to work through something called Workday, I think, worksheets, where we could build tools for managers to use to go in and make decisions and see that it would automatically total the financial impact, right? So as they were given these targets by leadership, they could go in, make decisions about who could go on furlough, and then that just fed right into the system. And we used that also to generate letters or emails that would then notify employees. So we had a record of the actions that were being taken to them, and all that worked through the system. And I say it like it was really easy to do, and I just know our systems people worked very, very hard, but they were able to power through a lot of these things. We had salary reductions, right? We had voluntary and involuntary. Some of the leaders immediately took pay cuts, but then some of the schools and departments said we're going to have to put some involuntary pay cuts through salary reductions temporarily. And so again, having the systems to be able to do this made the work of getting that done a lot easier, as well as the notification to employees. We had to work to eliminate overtime. So we were able to pull data out of the system that showed sort of where the hot spots were for overtime, and then make very targeted interventions to make sure that people understood that, in the past, you were working with these employees a lot of overtime. And of course, for the employee, that was a source of income. And so again, all these things had, obviously the HR people aspect, but the systems helped us to make these, get this information and make these changes. Similarly with schedule and hour adjustments, right? Some people said, well, I can't live without our employees completely, but let's make some shift changes, or let's reduce some hours. And that, of course, has an impact then on some of the benefit offerings. And right, so all these things had system impacts that needed to be worked through. And having all the information in one place, having our data team that had really spent 2019 sort of getting up to speed, made these things a lot easier. We also had retirement contribution changes. We had instances where we couldn't do it. It was very hard to do on the academic division for various reasons, plan design, but in the hospital, they were able to eliminate the employer contribution for retirement, so that, again, we could work through the system to make that happen. And again, even to be able to designate which employees are in which entity, right? Medical center versus academy, very important for us to be able to do. We also had to change our performance evaluation, everybody's favorite HR topic. But in times of crisis, that's the last thing we wanted to impose upon managers and employees, is like, fill out your annual performance evaluation. And just as an example of some of the chaos that we had inherited, the medical center was on a fiscal year, which is July 1, plan for their performance evaluations, as the academy was on a calendar year plan, so January 1. And so just even having the system accommodate these kinds of things. So we changed our performance evaluation. We completely redesigned what it looked like in the system to make it much more simple and easy to use. We changed some of those flows for approvals and things like that. And we were able to do this very quickly and involve our stakeholders in some of the design changes that they wanted to see, and then be able to give them immediately reports of information. Look, so many people have now completed this, or we're still seeing some delays in this particular department. So we could, again, make targeted interventions to try to help. We also considered an early retirement incentive. We had done this, I think, twice in the past, where the university leadership had decided, let's see if we can get some people to take advantage of an early retirement option. We gave them a lump sum sort of payment on salary, as well as a subsidy or a way to deal with the healthcare costs, the premiums that would be paid on healthcare. And so our ability to come in and look at this and say, what do the demographics look like on this? How many people are within kind of different age groups? We were able to do all kinds of modeling of what we could potentially save or spend in terms of the early retirement. Now, we haven't actually implemented that yet. It's still getting around to some socialization, but at least our ability to do that modeling quickly, efficiently helped leaders to be able to make some decisions. I'm looking at the chat just to make sure none of these chats are me. 15-minute warning. Okay, great. Sorry, my voice keeps fading. It might be just my voice. I don't think it's the internet, but I'll try to talk louder. Finally, communications and messaging, right? This was critical, that so much was going on, and all of these changes affected different kinds of employees, and our ability to use a feature within Workday to provide targeted messaging to managers, as an example, or messages to all employees. We were able to use the tools there to be able to do that. And again, something we wouldn't have been able to do other than email, right, in the past with the systems that we had. So that was what we consumed ourselves with in HR and the university from March until very recently. In June, university leadership decided that we would return. We call it, again, not return to campus, but return to grounds, and that classes would resume August the 25th. And so where we stand now in terms of what work is going to look like is it's T-minus 33 days to August the 25th. So we've got a lot of people doing a lot of things to get ready for the influx of 24,000-ish students back into our community. And so what's happening in the systems now to help this is that the furloughs and the salary reductions are ending, right? So our governor lifted the ban on elective surgeries. The hospital volumes have gone back up, right? The hospital is almost completely full again. And so they've recalled employees so that they could bring people back. The salary reductions, we're going to go through the 25th of July. So we've got the team now going in to sort of reverse out all of these temporary actions that we had to take for financial mitigation. We're going to resume on-site working, right? And so, of course, we're going to encourage remote working wherever that's possible. Some people are going to be needed on-site to help with the academic mission. We also are going to require online training for everybody who's coming back to work and all students. And so we can use Workday for all of the employees, right? Because not all the students are in the Workday system. But we've built modules for Workday Learning that we've been able to edit and change and alter very quickly, and then have people now be assigned to those through Workday so that you get a little notice, hey, you got to take this. And we have an attestation at the end that we ask them to certify. They've taken the training, they understand the rules about social distancing, the policies on mask wearing, etc. The other thing we are doing is a daily health check. The hospital started doing this, medical center started doing this months ago, where employees get an email and they go in and they are required to attest or certify that they have or don't have various symptoms related to COVID-19. That's done through Qualtrics. They built it sort of on their own and didn't really necessarily consult us. When the university wanted to discuss this, we found the University of Washington on the West Coast was using Workday for the daily health attestation or health check. And it was just a very nifty way for them to then have a record of people who were completing this information on the daily basis, and if they were going to be on site to be working. We took the decision not to use the Workday tool for this in particular. Lots of reasons for that, but we have an app, a new app that's built to be used on people's smartphones and things for the daily health check, but the option was available for us to use Workday in that regard. We're also going to have to handle accommodations because people are going to make, even if they're they have to be on site. Probably they're going to make an accommodation. Maybe they're taking care of somebody who's sick. Maybe they are sick themselves, or they have childcare issues, right? As the school systems around us try to decide how they're going to stand up the K-12 operation, that's going to obviously impact employees' ability to come physically present to work. We just got a list yesterday of some more compensation changes where leaders at the various schools have agreed voluntarily to take some salary cuts. So again, I was able to get that off to our compensation group, and they're able to turn that on a dime. And as if all this wasn't enough, we had Virginia's legislative cycle usually has a July 1 implementation date or effective date for new legislation. And Virginia passed a law that, among other things, requires a certain notification within 10 days that an employee discloses that they are pregnant. And so we've had, and the law became effective July the 1st. The final regs on all of that were late June. And so we've had to figure out, okay, now how are we going to do this, right? And so we built into the orientation that you would get when you come to Workday this notification in case you happen to be pregnant. And then we're going to figure out a way to then use that for record keeping so that we now can be able to prove, if we need to, that this required notification has been made. So again, just these things falling out of the sky, seemingly, and then other things that are yet unknown. We don't know what's coming next, but we're really glad to have the ability to pivot and work quickly, use our expertise on the system, the things that we've learned over the course of the last year plus, to be able to provide the great value and service to the university at a time when it's incredibly critical that HR demonstrate value and take care of the people who are so critical to what we do here. So that is the end of my slide presentation. I've got a little slide here about questions and discussions. So I'll open it up now to the moderators. If there are questions that have come through, or if people have ideas that they want to share related to what I've been talking about, happy to accommodate all that right now.
Michael, again, it's Ron Wagner with Workday. Thank you so much. Super helpful. We do have, if you have a moment, one or two quick questions that came in through the Zoom chat. The first one is around change management and around delegations. So it was more, I think, a question around, did you encounter any challenges with people wanting to delegate? It sounds from your statistics like that was pretty, initially people were afraid of that, but pretty low in the long run. But maybe if you could comment more on that topic.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it was, to say it was pitchforks and burning torches when we announced, manager self-service as we were in the socialization phase of the new implementation would be an exaggeration, not really, because people couldn't believe that we're going to require managers to do these things, or we're going to, especially faculty, right? Faculty who manage people, that doesn't tend to be their big strength. Their big strength is either teaching or research, right? Yet they may have a grant and they're the principal investigator on a grant. And by virtue of that grant, then they have a team of people that they have to manage. But they would always ask their assistants or somebody else, right, to take care of these administrative tasks for them. And so because of the way Workday is structured through the supervisory organization, everything sort of rolls up to a manager to take these various actions. And so we had to do a lot of listening, right, about what their concerns were, and then try to figure out the best way, like what tasks could be delegated. Not every task, perhaps, but we had a very interactive process where we listened to what the concerns were and then tried to address them. So there was lots of change management. We had 44 events every month, right? We had different meetings we had to go to during the implementation phase, right? The medical center cabinets, the president's cabinet, the dean's meeting, the associate dean's meeting, employee council meeting, right? There were 44 of these events that we would go to where we had these conversations and socialization and sort of engaged in the change management process. And I will say this, for anybody contemplating having as much fun as we did to do this on their own, managing the meetings was a task that I think we totally underestimated when we were beginning. Just building decks, getting materials ready, huge lift. But in the end, right, we heard what they wanted, so we created this delegation, the notion of delegation. We socialized it like crazy, but then the statistics really haven't borne it out. People are finding that if they need to do something, it's pretty darn easy. They can do it on their mobile device, they can click a button in the email, and they can just do it, right? So it didn't end up being such a big deal after all.
Well, that's terrific. That's a huge accomplishment, because that topic seems to always be sensitive, as you've noted, especially in the faculty community with their leadership responsibilities. If you have one other quick moment, there's
Sure.
another question that came in around your organizational size, like as you are today in the team that's managing HR, or I should say rather the team that's managing Workday. Could you comment a little bit about the team dynamic and the size of the organization? Is it approximately what you thought it would be when you set out? Because you had some goals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, the other thing, and I didn't mention this, but we had taken the decision before we began all of this nonsense to separate payroll out from it. Used to be under HR, but we moved it to finance. I probably would rethink that decision in terms, because then we had sort of slightly different priorities coming out of finance versus what was coming out of HR. I say that because payroll is a big, huge piece of what we were doing, and it's so important, right? If we messed payroll up, it wouldn't matter if we got delegation right or performance management right. People would just not be happy. So when we designed the organization, we had sort of the prototype model. We had talked to we did like 21 reference calls with other universities to understand how they had structured their Workday, the team that managed Workday. And so we had an idea in mind. We did not hit the mark. We put too few people, quite honestly, at first. But now we have a pretty good structure in place. Somebody's in charge of sort of all the talent functions, and then has a couple of analysts who support them. Somebody's in charge of payroll, obviously. Somebody's in charge of the benefits and total rewards piece. So I think that, and then we have a huge project management component, right? Who manages all of the Workday releases and our own scrums to be able to get throughput done. So I'm gonna say, I just saw the org chart today. It's probably around, and the data and reporting, right, which is another big component.
Mm-hmm.
There are 5 people in the data and reporting team. So it's probably 20 to 26 people who are in there doing the configuration, doing the testing that's resulting from that, and then also working with the subject matter experts on the product releases. The other thing I will say, 2 quick things. One, we're moving to an automated testing platform, and we're going to test it in August. So this is going to be interesting to see how that helps us. The other thing we did is we used a tool called WalkMe, W-A-L-K, WalkMe, which is an overlay on top of the Workday platform, which is kind of like a robot or bot assistant to help you work through transactions. And we just launched that pilot a couple months ago. So we're waiting to see if that helps us, because Workday innovates so quickly. The old way of developing training materials, they quickly become outdated. So we had to come up with a new way to deal with that as well.
Well, that's terrific. Again, I can't thank you enough, Michael, for spending the time with us and sharing your thoughts on your deployment, and also all of the transformation that you've been leading at UVA. I mean, just terrific accomplishments. I think we are close on time here, so maybe with that we would again thank you and thank the people who joined us today for attending, and hope that everybody enjoys another really good day at the Learning Man event. And thank you to our hosts at ASU for having us. But
yeah, have a great event, everybody. I'm really glad to have been with you. And follow up with me if you have other questions.